What was the scariest we need to leave now gut feeling that you've ever experienced? Serious. Viewing to see a flat that didn't exist. Not my story, but one my mum told me from her 20s when she was living and working in London, UK. I will do my best to retell it. Also, I'm dyslexic, so apologies in advance for grammar. This story always gives me the creeps though when I think about it. So back in her 20s, my mum was living in London and looking to move into a slightly bigger place. She'd found a really good price for a flat slightly out from the area she was hoping. She'd called the agent to book a viewing, and that's when things turned odd. So the guy booking the viewing started asking weird requests and questions, such as to bring her passport, her age, race, and physical appearance. Would she be coming on her own? Did she have a car, or would she be getting the bus? He very persistent that she should arrive by bus as it would be easiest for her. Explains it was a straight road down from the bus stop to the apartment block. Obviously quite unnerved by this call, but still interested because the flat looked ideal. She and my dad, who were dating at the time, decided to check the exterior and surrounding area. The day before the viewing, they drove there. First passing the bus stop, he was indicating her to arrive via. From the bus stop, there was about 152 hundredths meters of derelict wasteland that she would have to walk past to get to the flat. And standing at the end of the street in the location this apartment block should have been was a huge abandoned building. Smashed broken windows, graffiti, no entry signs, the lot. Definitely nothing inhabitable in sight. Still, when she tells this today, you can see how much it rightly shook her. Of course, she didn't go to her viewing. However, she informed the police, advising them of the planned time and place. From what she saw, from following up with them, they didn't appear to take this tip seriously and little was done. A couple years later though, while in a pub with some friends, she gets chatting to a guy she just met through mutual friends that night. He was in the police, and through conversation her story came up. He said that that area at the time of her viewing had a huge human trafficking problem. Still gives me chills. When I was a kid, an adult patted my head and I developed an instant inexplicable loathing for him and refused to be alone with him. My parents told me I was being ridiculous and forced me to be around him. He was later sent to prison for abuse of a girl. Oh yeah, trust your gut. When my dad was in his 20s, he was on a trip to the beach with friends, but they only had one car. Last day, they all pile in the car to drive home, but dad got a weird feeling and decided to stay longer and get the bus back, even though it meant his mom would be super mad at him as she had some work for him to do. Car made it all the way back to their hometown and was T-boned in an intersection in the main street. All four of his friends in the car died. I hope your dad is in a better place mentally. That must be such a horrible feeling. That's tragic, and you have my condolences. Well, it was 50 plus years ago, so I would hope he's come to terms with it, but he only really tells it as an interesting story. He never really talks about how it made him feel. It's that generation, I guess. I was walking down the street in a very unfamiliar city with a group of friends. I got this feeling and didn't know how to articulate it, so I said to the group, "Hey, I've got to use the restroom. Can we just duck inside this subway real quick? I promise I'll be quick." About a minute later, there was a shootout just up the block. If we wouldn't have gone into the restaurant, we would have all been standing right in the middle of the incident waiting to cross the street. I was scuba diving in Asia. 3 of us went to a reef that hadn't been dived on before, which bottomed out at 50-70 m depth. 5 minutes into the dive, we all get a very bad feeling like we were being watched. Ignored it, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Further 10 minutes into the dive, we all watched the silhouette of a white shark glide slowly past, right on the periphery of where we could see, then glide back in the other direction a minute later. The decompression stop to get out was the scariest 3 minutes of my life. The sea is like space on Earth. Doesn't I need to go home now feeling count? And it wasn't me, but my mom. Anyway, I was around 12 or so, and my mom left to run an errand, leaving me alone. Very soon after she left, the doorbell rang. This was weird because we lived on a hill with only 2 neighbors. We all kept to ourselves, and we just didn't get random visitors. Thanks to some conveniently placed picture frames, I could see out the door without being seen. I look out and see a young man I don't recognize. He's dressed in a shirt and jeans, and something just feels off. So I ignore him and wait for him to leave, but he doesn't. He lingers and starts smoking. Again, this is an isolated hill. I'm alone, and now I'm getting scared. I go and hide and plan to wait for my mom, except she just left, had a few errands to run, and I couldn't reach the phone without the guy seeing me. As I'm trying to figure out what to do, my mom comes home. She runs in and asks if I'm okay. Apparently she got this random go home now urge. She hadn't even run her first errand yet, but turned around immediately, found the guy in our yard and asked what he needed. I guess he muttered something about looking for someone someone or something to that effect, and my mom told him to leave. Apparently he was acting very strangely and made my mom nervous. To this day, I have no idea what he wanted and no idea how my mom knew to come home, but I am very grateful she did. When I was about 12, my mom randomly woke up one night and suddenly had the urge to check on me for no reason whatsoever. I'd just woken up with nausea and stomach pains when she came into the room, but I hadn't made any noise or called out. Went straight to the hospital where I was in surgery having my appendix out within 2 hours. Mom intuition is weird and real. We've had the same thing when our nephew was sick. Our family was poor, so we sleep in the same room. While sleeping, we all, probably 5 people, suddenly woke up at the same time, like we sat up, woke up kind of thing. Then my nephew had seizures right after. Grew up along the Gulf Coast. Daily storms in the summer were normal. We were heading home when one came in really quick. All of us were elementary or junior high age. We were crossing 2 wide open football fields. All of our hair was standing straight up in the air. We knew that meant lightning was imminent. A car was driving past, jumped the curb, and drove up to us. We all got into the car and she slowly rolled back to the street. We went another block and the lightning struck the goalpost. It was so close. Was never afraid of lighting until then. That was around 1979. I'm 57 and don't mess around. The one story in this entire post that ends with, and so I got into the stranger's car. I was freshly married in my early 20 SS, living in Fallbrook, California. My husband, ex, was a Marine and was at work, and I was driving home from visiting family further south. In order to get into Fallbrook, you have to travel along this long, dark, and windy street called Mission Road. It's already a super dark night, about 11 p.m., and it's a little foggy as well. I'm slowing down and coming around this slight bend in the road, and all of a sudden the hair goes up on my neck, and I feel incredibly anxious. About 5 seconds later, a young woman jumps out of the brush directly ahead of me, maybe 50 feet away, on the left-hand side of the road, while waving her arms in the air and gesturing frantically for me to pull over. I swerved a bit to the right, slowing down even further, but I did not stop. She was young, maybe early 20s or even late teens, and a little dirty, and I was immediately conflicted over continuing to drive, but something told me not to stop under any circumstances. I got further up the road, slowed a little more, and dialed 911 with one shaky hand. The dispatcher said she'd send someone to check, but encouraged me not to feel badly. Apparently, there had already been calls about this girl over the last hour, and they were unable to find her when police followed up. I heard a few weeks later about some carjacking/robbery attempts in the area. Very relieved I listened to my instincts that night. I was at the state fair with my mom and my best friend. Friend and I were looking at the rides and the games. This creepy guy abbed his blonde girlfriend, kept babbling at us about taking headshots and that he was a modeling agent. He just seemed off and really sleazy, and the girl was giving me the creeps, so I pretended that I saw my mom telling us to come and grabbed my friend and dragged her off. She was close to 5'8" and not a small girl, saying 13 years old. I was 4, 9, and around 65 pounds at 14 years old. A few days later, there's a news story and rumors going around the school about 2 girls being kidnapped, assaulted, and murdered. They were taken from the fair the same day we were there, just few hours later. The creepy couple were Gerald and Charlene Gallegos, serial killers. Wow, I just went down a 2:30 a.m. Wikipedia deep dive on this. How wild that you were so close to being a victim. I was at a family gathering, basically a reunion, but just for family within reasonable driving distance. Probably 30 people all together. It was at County Park on a small lake with some grills and buildings. Just an empty hall with some picnic tables inside. You could rent for this kind of stuff. The sky started darkening as a storm was approaching. All the coolers, chairs, balls, and other kids' toys, etc. were brought into the building anticipating the rain. The plan was to wait it out since afternoon showers are common just about every day in the summer. Something in the air didn't feel or smell right, even though it appeared to be just a regular afternoon storm. Hair on my neck was standing up and I was in full flight mode. Can't really describe it. The feeling in the pit of my stomach can only be described as absolute dread. I told my wife to take my daughter and get in the car. My brother-in-law took one look at my face and said, "What's wrong?" Apparently, I was white as a ghost. It wasn't even raining yet, and I was full on panic, yelling for everyone to leave. Something isn't right. No one else was that worried, mostly concerned with how I was acting. I went out to the car, and as soon as I was about to turn the key, the tornado sirens went off. We were not far from wherever they put those, or they are just stupidly loud, because it was deafeningly loud. Now the rest of the family is pouring out of the building to their cars, kids crying, and I look across the lake maybe a few miles in the distance and see a funnel cloud. Got the hell out of there, as did everyone else. The building we had rented for this family BBQ thing was completely annihilated. Literally just a slab of concrete and a shit ton of debris all around. It was hit dead on by an EF3. There's something about the air before a tornado. I had a similar experience when I was in HS, babysitting two young girls. We were in their living room playing next to a big picture window, and I remember looking outside, noticing how it suddenly became very dark and still. I moved them to the other room without windows so they wouldn't get worried. 5 minutes later, my mom texted to make sure we were inside. The sirens were going off in her hometown, about 20 miles away. It was being obliterated. 200-year-old brick churches torn in half. Thankfully, all the damage was material. When I was a teenager, me and some friends were hanging out around midnight. A caravan drives past slowly with a few people looking out the windows. We all look at each other quiet, and the caravan pulls into a nearby parking space. We all get up and walk to our bikes because something feels really off. A few minutes later, we hear someone shout, and as I turned around, there was about 5 or 6 people getting out with metal pipes and other things in hands. We ran so fast nothing happened, but I'm 99% sure we were about to get beaten and robbed. Years ago, I was at a club with some friends. I was at the bar and for some reason looked down at the other end of the bar and saw 2 guys quietly arguing. They tried to keep from being overheard, but I saw their agitated face. I went back to my group of friends and told them we should go. This was a popular club and it took us forever to get in, so they didn't want to leave. I don't know what came over me, but I picked up my friend's girlfriend. She was barely 5 tall and started walking to the door. She was kicking the entire time, and the rest of the party followed me outside telling me to put her down. When we got outside, we heard the distant pop pop and people screaming. We looked at each other for a second, then ran for our cars. I forgot to put her down and was still carrying her over my shoulders. Update? Dang, I didn't think this would blow up. It was the early 1990s and we were at a club in Miami. If I recall correctly from the local news, it was a drug deal that went bad between 2 groups. No one was killed, but they wounded each other and a couple of innocent people. LOL, I'm still not carrying her today. The legend are false. Those 2 eventually got married and they mentioned me in their speech, something about the other groomsmen holding me back so that I don't get the urge to carry her across the doorway. About 3 weeks ago now, I was blackwater diving off the coast of Boynton Beach, Florida. For those that don't know, blackwater diving involved being dumped with a light buoy to drift over hundreds of feet of water in the Gulf Stream at night. The light buoy attracts all sorts of alien critters that come up from the deep to feed, so it's a lot of fun for underwater photographers. Needless to say, as a precaution, all divers must at minimum wear a light on their tank to be seen, and I had accidentally grabbed my blue blinky light. Before I was going to jump in, the captain mentioned that blue blinking lights were used by fishermen to attract big things at night. As a regular shark diver, there's not too much I'm afraid of down there, but something sent a chill down my spine and I switched my light for a regular green glow stick. That very same night, a legendary blackwater diver was on another boat a couple miles north and got full on impaled in the leg by a huge swordfish. The fish ripped the sword out of his leg and then kept beating him with it, the way they hunt for the big squid down deep. Dude had his leg torn up and had to self-rescue himself from about 100 feet of depth. No idea if he'll be able to walk, let alone dive again. I've never heard of blackwater diving that's so interesting and super creepy. Got any more stories? I'm quite new at it, but the stories from the old timers are wild. Squid the size of dogs, baby octopus riding jellyfish, 16 feet long blanket octopus unfurling their blankets. Random passes by makos, orcas, and great whites. Once you're that far out into the ocean, almost anything can happen. Picture it, 1994. I was 18 and waitressing in a sports bar. A comedy club was upstairs. One night, a comedian kept visiting between sets. He was funny and charming, and he seemed quite smitten with me. He asked me out to late night breakfast. If you've ever been in hospitality, you know we go out and eat at 3 a.m. I changed after my shift and waited a few minutes for him. I realized I really didn't know this person and I should not let him in my car. I decided to be smart and GTFO. A few years later, I was absentmindedly flipping through a People magazine at a friend's house. That is when I saw my comedian date, Vince Champ, had been arrested listed as a serial rapist. His favorite target was young college girls, and they finally caught him after putting the puzzle together between victims and his campus circuit. Holy shit, I dodged a bullet. I think he may still be in jail. He was that terrible. A shady looking guy told me to come here when I was waiting for my mom under the apartment building. I was about 10. I ran upstairs immediately without looking back. Looking back as a 25-year-old, I couldn't imagine why any normal adult would need to speak to a random 10-year-old unless the kid looks lost or is doing something dangerous. Glad I bolted. Around that age, I was walking my dog around the block, and one of our neighbors on the street over introduced himself to me, complimented my little dog. I felt very grown up talking with him. Then he told me he was sad his puppy ran away into the woods behind the neighborhood. Could I please come with him? As a dog lover, he just knew his puppy would come out of hiding if he saw my dog playing in the woods with us. Now, as an adult, I too realize that it is not normal for someone to ask a child they don't know to come with them to another location. So creepy. Dumb as I was, I had no ill feelings. My dog was kinda old and hated playing, so I told him I had to go home, saved my own life. I was a stupid, trusting kid that happened to have a boring old dog. In 2012, I drove across the country from Philly to LA with a good friend of mine. I'm a big guy, she's a smaller woman. Just for context, we camped the whole way out. The plan was to get to LA, drop her off at her new apartment, and then I'd fly home. She couldn't get into her apartment until Wednesday morning, and we arrived outside of LA on Tuesday evening. We didn't have money for hotels or anything, so we camped in Angeles National Forest. No idea why, but I had a weird feeling being this close to a major city and camping. Felt like a bad vibe, but we got there and set up before dark and ate dinner. My friend asked, if you could see any animal tonight, what would you want to see? And I swear, I said not a person. When we arrived, there was only one other campsite set up at the campground, and they were around the bend from us. We saw the guy who was camping there. Anyway, we go to sleep. At some point, it's dark, and I wake up. There's a flashlight shining around our tent. I figure it's just another campsite that arrived after we fell asleep. Then I hear clear as day a man's voice right outside the door of my tent say, "Who's in there? Who's in that tent?" My friend woke up and said, "Hello." So it wasn't just me that heard it. We both said, "Hello? Who's that?" But got no response. Didn't really hear anyone walk away. Didn't see a flashlight. I freaked the fuck out. Why the hell would someone knock on our tent in the middle of the night? I grabbed my headlamp and my knife, and I zipped open the tent and jumped out really fast in case he was waiting to bonk me on the head. But no one was there. I looked everywhere, and there was no one. No other campsite. My friend said we should just go back to sleep, but I was too scared. It was 4 a.m. and raining, and I told her we needed to leave right fucking now. She said I was scaring her, and I said, good. And we threw everything in the car, all wet and crumpled up, and started to leave. On the way out on the road in the campsite, we saw what I presumed was the guy. He wasn't the other guy from the other campsite, just some random guy walking back towards our site. I cracked the window as we passed him and said, "Dude, what the fuck?" And all he said was, "Sorry for freaking you guys out," and kept walking back towards where we had camped. We booked it the fuck out of there and drove straight to Santa Monica because we had no idea what else to do. I have no fucking idea why he did that, but it scared the ever-living piss out of me. Still haven't camped in Angeles since then, but I'm actually going again this summer. This happened about 2 years ago. I was 16, just barely got my driver's license a month or two prior, and was headed to martial arts class with my 13-year-old brother. Class started at 7 p.m. and it was mid-December, so even though we left at around 6:30, it was still quite dark outside. As I was driving to karate, I noticed yellow headlights blaring behind me. I couldn't see the car very well because of how dark it was, but the headlights alone made the car as noticeable as possible. I kept driving, but the closer I got to the karate studio, the more I noticed the lights still behind me. It was starting to freak me out a bit, especially since this car had been following us for about 7-ish minutes now. I remembered hearing a tip online about taking 4 right turns to see if a car is actually following you or not, because if the car follows through all of those turns, they would have just gone in a full circle, and no sensible driver would do that. So I decided to do so at the next intersection. Sure enough, the yellow headlights were still there, shining directly at me after I'd made my 4 right turns. Trying not to panic, I pulled into a well-lit gas station to try and get a better look at the car. The car followed, so I instructed my brother to snap a quick picture, then to call 911. As before he dialed the number phone out, the car veered out of the gas station and started speeding down the road, leaving us alone. I assume because they saw us take a picture of their car, including their license plate. I called 911 anyways, gave them the details of the car, and explained what happened happened and waited at the gas station a little longer before leaving in the opposite direction. We didn't go to karate that night and instead took a very roundabout way home, and I made sure to be as confusing and hard to follow as I possibly could. No yellow headlights followed us. We then locked the entire house when we arrived home, just to be safe, and we were left completely unbothered. To this day, I'm not sure what happened to that car, if any arrests were made, etc., but I still think I dodged a bullet, especially considering that we were just two minors in a car driving fairly late at night.
If you want, you can like and subscribe.